Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the latest TravMedia professional development session. It is great to have you with us this afternoon. Today's burning topic is what makes travel news? How do consumer and trade media make decisions around what is newsworthy and what is not? Is it the pure impact of the story, or is it always a focused concentration on readership and what they'll respond to? We'll find out about that. We want to look at the consumer media's take on it. We want to look at the trade media's take on it. And in that respect, we couldn't have two better panelists today, and I'll introduce them now so they can give you a wave. From the trade camp, we have Pippa Jacks, Group Editor at TTG Media. Hi, Pippa.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Lovely to have you here. The webinar queen of the UK in recent weeks. And equally, not webinar queen, but Ben Clatworthy, Assistant Travel Editor at the Times and Sunday Times, giving us the consumer media's perspective on what makes travel news. So, Ben, lovely to have you here.
Thank you, and hello, everyone.
Very good indeed. So in a moment, I'm going to ask Ben and Pippa for their top-line thoughts from the heart about how they arrive at decisions on what they're going to print or publish news-wise. And after that, it's over to you, our audience. And what do we love? We love questions. So do start thinking about any questions that you'd like to put to Ben and Pippa. And do that via the Q&A box on Zoom. Please put your company name at the end of your question. We probably know who you are. Just in case we don't, put your company name, because Zoom will only tell us your first name and surname. So some really great questions about what makes trade news, what makes consumer news would be fantastic. I've also got a few questions I've received in advance, which we'll go through. So today is the latest event in the TravMedia Meet series of news webinars and socials. Don't forget that we've got an ultimate travel quiz coming up this week. Please register for that webinar now. It is sponsored by Gran Canaria. There's great prizes on offer. Do come along and have fun. It's tons of fun. So please make sure you register. And socially, if you're feeling social, we're on a hashtag of TravMedia Meets, and our Insta and Twitter handle is @TravMedia_UK. So let us get going. And I will just say we're going to end a few minutes early because the webinar queen is going straight from this one into another at 4. So for Pippa, we're going to try and end at like 5 to, so she can have at least a cup of tea between webinars.
Perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, Ben has offered to go first. Thank you, Ben, on the subject of how the Times makes decisions about travel news. So Ben has been writing for the Times since 2013. He's been staffer on the paper for 4 years and is now assistant travel editor. He previously covered not only travel at the Times, but also personal finance and property. And he contributes regularly, not just to the weekend travel pages, but to breaking news stories on travel for the main pages of the Times. And you may just have noticed in the current period that travel has kind of dominated news pages on national newspapers. So Ben has been immensely busy, and he'll give us his take on that. I think today is bound to be about the epidemic and how travel PRs can work with the media during the epidemic, but we're also going to try and look at timeless issues around news and the travel media. Ben, lovely to have you here, and over to you.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. I was talking to the news editor of the Sunday Times last week, and she was saying that as much as it being a pandemic and a health story, it's also been a huge travel story. I mean, back in January, we had 3 consecutive days of front page stories about the FCO banning travel to China at a time when really, I took a telephone call when I was sitting in a pub one evening saying, we need you to write, the FCO have just banned travel to China. And we hardly knew anything about coronavirus. I practically didn't even know how to spell it at that point. And yet we were suddenly saying the FCO's banned an entire country. A few weeks later, I was on Radio 5 Live and made the first mistake of the pandemic in saying, well, of course, this is an issue in Asia. There's no way you would ever have a lockdown in any Western country. This only works in China. let's plough on, very much in a similar way to the government at the time. And a month later, Italy was in lockdown, and I was back on saying, well, I'm terribly sorry, I got it totally wrong. I didn't think we would ever be there. So it's become and when Italy locked down, that was a travel story back on the front page of the paper as well. So it's been a really interesting time. As much as it is a health story, it has been huge. And now this week, it feels that it's, I mean, what's going to happen is so up in the air, and so there's so much speculation. I mean, every day the government are saying different things. It's very interesting. But in terms of news, it's actually come to the forefront a lot more recently, because our travel pages have evaporated for various reasons. One being, obviously, advertising understandably isn't there as much as it was before, but also it's very difficult to advise people to go traveling when it's against the law. So we've had to adapt, but it's meant there's been so much news to do. But one of the things I noticed the most, and it's the reason I said to Henry about doing property, is that property and travel PRs are very similar. Lots of the agencies do both as well. Some of the bigger ones cover both sectors as well. But I do notice that, and I really don't mean this in a rude way whatsoever, but when I say the word news and tomorrow's paper to travel PRs, and this is generalization, and I'm not genuinely being rude, but I do find people clam up and panic slightly, and there's actually really no need to. We're not out to stitch you up. If something's gone wrong and I'm coming to ask for a comment, that's to make sure that you have a right of reply. Again, it's not, of course, we are on the consumer side, and it's been very interesting with the refunds debates of late, because I can see both points of view. I read the comment pieces that go into the trade publications. I read the trade publications as soon as I get up every morning, same as I read every other national newspaper. I, in the same order, will do the papers, mainly to check that I haven't missed anything horrendous the day before, and the Daily Mail have some huge story that I had no idea about, and then I read the trade publications. And so I can see both points of view. I know that it's tricky for companies. I get that. I talk to tour operators, I talk to travel agents. I know it's difficult and complicated, but I have to report on the consumer side. And so there have been times with difficult conversations, but genuinely we're not out to stitch you up. And actually, when you ever write anything bad about travel, you get absolutely hounded for it. And whenever you write anything good about travel, you hear nothing at all. And that's, I understand that's life, but that is one of the things that happens. But I just think that there's a slight feeling that the consumer press are always out to get you, and it's not that way at all. And actually, it brings me on that one of the things that stories come two ways in the newspaper. They either come from me to the news desk saying, this is a story, I think we should do it. And they'll either say yes or just ignore me. And the other way that we get stories is that I'll get a frantic call after news conference in the morning saying, someone's said this, someone's read this, someone's heard this. Can you go away and find out if it's a story to do? And that's when I actually use TravMedia quite a lot to put out things to get sound out, because they've got a vast network. I can get a good sounding out. And that's normally when I've been asked to look into a story, as opposed to when I've got one myself because someone's brought it to me, or I've read it somewhere else and I think we could do something similar or follow on or so forth. So, but one of the things that I don't get enough of, for the ones that I want to pitch, are insightful trends, developments. And I know that's difficult at the moment, but one of my surveys, I get so many surveys. Ben's Travel has surveyed 20 people. 18 of them say that when they go on holiday, they want to have an ice cream. what am I to do with that piece of information? But moreover, if you look at Nigel Thompson, the Mirror and Express travel editor, and Lisa Minot at The Sun, they ridicule surveys on Twitter regularly, saying they're putting them on their spite. I'm sitting at the Times saying this is of no use to me whatsoever. You don't see them on the Telegraph website, and you don't see them in the trade press. So why and they can be so abstract and random. I'm not going to name it. I'm not going to name any, but just that a company that has nothing to do with what they've surveyed on, or the link is so tenuous as well that it doesn't matter. But also that the surveys are the sample sizes are often so small. When I worked in personal finance, we weren't allowed to do anything really with a sample size of fewer than 2,500 people. And yet surveys come all the time. And if the tabloids are not using them and ridiculing them, they're of no use to me. And I'm sure Pippa would agree that they're not hugely of use to the trade. Why it seems like such an amount of time is put into this, and money, I assume. It must cost money to survey these people, and they're totally useless in my humble opinion. That said, there's a huge opportunity for stories from PRs to get into the news pages, and the travel pages are very well read, but a newspaper, the massive numbers come on news stories because that's where people go first. And all our indication that we know is that travel tends to be read later in the day, on a Saturday and a Sunday when we publish our travel pages, than people go to news first. So there's a lot of scope, but also there's a lot of room for stories that have come from PRs. In yesterday's paper, there was a story, a big story. It was came from up north about paddleboard suppliers running out of kit because everyone's taken up paddleboarding. Now, that you could say, if you were the paddleboard company putting that out, that actually why would you admit to not being able to fulfill demand? But it's a brilliant story. Everyone's going paddleboarding during lockdown. It made a huge lead, and it's evidently come from a PR-led story. And my story on the front of the paper yesterday, which was holiday firms lure nervous Britons abroad with cheap deals, that received some criticism. I saw some stuff on Twitter, people saying that that's the last thing that holiday companies need after the pandemic. And I'm sure that is. I mean, it would be terrific to be able to sell vastly expensive holidays as soon as lockdown eases. But the point that was being made, and the bit where all the worlds collide, is that I actually got this idea for the story from TTG because somebody had done a piece of analysis in TTG about holiday prices. I put in a few calls to a couple of companies on Sunday, but also just took a quote directly from TTG and obviously referenced it properly back to them, so it's not just lifting and stealing. But and that story ended up going on the front page of the whole paper, and came from I was scrolling through Twitter on Sunday, and I was on duty to do stuff anyway, and saw that. But one of the other things that I notice is, in reading the trade press, I always find that people are more candid in the trade press. They open up more in a way, and I don't want to diminish and make people clam up for Pippa now as well, but the point being is we're all reading all the stuff anyway. The trade read the national newspapers and vice versa, and it's interesting seeing when I call people and try and get quotes versus some of the stuff you read in the trades. It's that it is more candid, and that's one of the other things. I'm often, if you're going through PRs, I'll often be asking to speak to the chief executive or somebody senior. And one of the things that comes back so often is, oh, could you just outline what questions you want to ask them? And I genuinely, hand on heart, do not really make lists of questions that I'm going to ask people when I ring them up. I know what the story is I'm doing. I want to talk to them about that, but I my notebook is an absolute mess. I really don't make detailed lists of questions. I just ring people up and sound them out. It's a conversation how you would. And again, it's not an opportunity to try and catch people out. I'm not saying, the reason I don't want to send you a list of questions is not because I'm going to speak to the chief executive that you put me in touch with and ask them about a completely different story that I haven't told you about. It's not anything like that. And the other reason that I always want to speak to people is because, as good a writer as you all are, though, when you send me quotes that so-and-so has said, they always so often sound like basically 6 people have signed it off. The language is just totally different to what anyone would ever speak in normal life like. And I want, when you read a newspaper or a magazine or anything, you want the voices to sound like someone chatting. And when you send quotes, it's very useful actually when I send a TravMedia out to get a background, a quote of what they're likely to say in terms of the quote that you've typed out is very useful. But then that's when I come to you and say, actually, X managing director sounds like you've got a lot to say on this topic. Can I put a call into them? Can you set up an interview so I can chat to them? Then you get it in the natural language. And of course, we don't print the ums and ahs and we tidy it up, but it just sounds so much better. Obviously, that's completely different than if I'm saying, why have you stitched up X holidaymaker? You failed to give them a refund. Why? Of course, at that point, I would expect to state a written statement back. Of course, it makes total sense in that point. But when you're doing a nice story about, I did one the other week, campsites braced for a boom when lockdown restrictions are eased. And I ended up speaking to a wonderful chap from a camping website who was lively and very sprightly and wonderful. But someone else that I also tried to contact said, oh, no, you've sent us the statement. And then the next day sent me an email saying, why didn't you use it? And it was because it was a fun story about campsites opening, and your statement made out that it used someone had died on the campsite, the tone of voice that it was written in, and it was meant to be a nice, jolly thing. So I think I will wrap up because I've spoken for too long, but I just think that the biggest thing is that there's loads of scope for PR-led stories, trends, insights into what you're seeing in the newspapers, and particularly if you've got big clients that you can hang a whole story off of a huge client. If it's for using one that's gone, if it were Thomas Cook, for example, were a big enough name that you could basically if Thomas Cook says something when they used to put their trends report out, for example, that was perfect. We would absolutely take, you could write a story based on that. And it's different for Ben's holidays that no one's ever heard of. So you do have to be more inventive, but you can say, if you hear something that you think's a trend, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to say at the very top of the story, everyone's going camping this summer, saves Ben's holidays, but there's nothing to say it won't jog me to think, actually, there's possibly a story in this, and put more calls in and so on. So I hope that made vague sense, my ramblings.
Very much so. I think you're a journalist of instinct. You make gut instinct decisions about what's newsworthy immediately, rather than being a very kind of logical and drawn out journalist. And it's great to have you talking. And I'm very glad you got in touch and said, Henry, I'll appear on one of your webinars, because that was wonderful content.
No, I just think there is so much scope for it, and it's an under. I just don't hear enough from people. It's too many roundups of things that we're just not going to use that come in, when actually you can get great exposure in the newspaper by thinking outside the box.
In what is ostensibly a newsworthy press release, are there some words that you think should never appear in the spokesperson's quote? Because you were talking about the quote paragraph. Kind of, which words put you most off a news story?
Corporate jargon, I think, would be the big one. Stuff where it's just I once said, what did I purchased? I had the word purchased in a story once, and the sub-editor said to me, you never sit at the pub and say to your friend, I went out and purchased a bag or a new rucksack or something. You don't. everything should sound in a newspaper like it's you're chatting to someone. Of course, we use strange words that I was laughing the other day with my mother about how no one can be a person in a newspaper. You're a tourist, you're a holiday maker, you're a motorist, you're a taxpayer. You're never just a person, you're a homeowner. It perplexes me. So there are odd, we are guilty of it ourselves, of dressing. I mean, the number of times I've written holiday makers during this pandemic, and there are no holiday makers, we're all sitting at home, but yet we still use the word. But it is just the corporate, really random stuff that you could just never say is what the biggest turn off.
Fantasy holiday makers. We're actually wearing sombreros at home all the time, but clearly no low-hanging fruit for you, no windows of opportunity, nothing like that. Thank you very much.
No.
Brilliant. Pippa, over to you for the trade media perspective on news. So to introduce Pippa, Group Editor of TTG Media, a legend in the industry, but I will just say that Pippa joined TTG in 2006, becoming features editor from 2014 to 2017. But I think it's in her years as group editor that TTG has, transformed radically, breaking into events and digital channels and really blossoming as a title. It has become, Pippa's been editor of the year during her time, but TTG has also been independent publishing company of the year at the PPAs in 2019, which I think reflects on her and Dan and the team's amazing transformation of the title and its fortunes. She's been very busy in recent times with webinars, and I'm very glad she can join us today. Lovely to have you here, Pippa. And over to you on today's topic. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Henry. You also missed that we are TravMedia Awards Trade Publication of the Year.
I didn't want to say, but well done again.
What an accolade. Yeah, we had an amazing 12-month period really, with redesigning the magazine last April, then redesigning the website in August, and we've won loads of awards. And it's not just about awards, but it does make us feel really good, and like we're doing something different and being recognised for it. So that's great. And key to that, and I'll come back to this actually, is the mission statement that we devised as part of our redesign. So TTG's been going since 1953. We had all sorts of slogans and kind of business statements and whatever over those years, including the voice of travel, the business of selling travel, but none of them really encapsulated what we were all about or gave us any sort of sense of purpose. So as of last April, we say that TTG Media exists to promote a smarter, better, fairer travel industry and to help travel businesses and professionals improve themselves to get there. I think that's really been core to our success over the last year or so, is just having that strong sense of purpose and what we're doing and making sure everything supports our vision really, which also comes into some of the news decision making. So I'll come back to that. I'm sure you're all familiar with TTG, but just really, really quickly, we were a print magazine, which is distributed to about 15,500 travel professionals in the UK and Ireland. We actually haven't printed a magazine since the start of April. It's been digital edition only. But that print audience is 95% travel agents and tour operator res staff, really. So very much the people that sell travel is who would get the magazine. We then have our digital audience. We fully profile the users of our website. We've got 30,000 registered users now, so we can tell exactly who they are, where they are, whether they're selling or whether they're a supplier, and cut the data in all sorts of cool ways. And we've got about 12,000 travel agents on there, about 7,000 tour operators. So you can see the mix is a little bit different. The digital audience is less travel agent dominant, but they are still making up the bulk of our audience. In terms of what makes news for us then, obviously we've got pages and pages to fill on a weekly basis. Typical magazine would be pre-coronavirus, kind of 60, 70 pages. I've always been very news-led, so of that, maybe 2/3 of the pages would be news, and the remaining third would be features. So we are hungry for news on a regular basis. And the team is set up. There's definitely a weighting on the editorial side towards news as well. So there's always huge scope to get into TTG, but certainly not everything makes it in. One of the main considerations for us is is this relevant to UK and Ireland-based travel agents? And that automatically excludes quite a lot of travel companies, actually, that just don't work with travel agents. I find we get a lot of phone calls from PRs saying, oh, can I tell you about this company? And we say, do you sell through travel agents? Does it sell through travel agents? Sometimes they don't know the answer and they have to go back to their client and find out, and they're not really sure what selling through travel agents even means, which is a bit frustrating. So we try and be patient with those PRs, but especially if they call on press day, it's a bit frustrating. But if a company isn't going to sell through travel agents and pay them commission, we can't justify giving them space in our very precious pages and in the magazine and online, and our sort of limited time and resources, really. So that's really key. And then again, another filter on that would be, will this article, will this news story, will this news-led feature, is it going to help travel agents be smarter, better, fairer in what they do, looking after their customers better, being sharper, using better technology, giving better advice, improving their business, helping them focus more on sustainability and things like that as well. So they're the main kind of deciding factors. And then as well, just as Ben would have, it's how seriously big is this news story? So there'd then be that kind of hierarchy of how many people is it going to affect? How big is this company? We do tend to go bigger on the bigger travel businesses. So we will write about TUI, for example. TUI don't advertise with us particularly anymore. They're not particularly travel agent friendly, to be honest, but because they are the market leader and whatever they do is a good barometer of things that are going on elsewhere, we will write about them. It's difficult to cover every teeny tiny one-man band tour operator in the UK, even if they might sell through travel agents every now and again, just because of that kind of hierarchy of relevance to our readers. In terms of how we source stories, we get a lot, obviously, from the national news agenda, the news wires, corporate results, all those sorts of things. We get a hell of a lot sent in on press releases. Sometimes they're helpful. We get some of our juiciest stories probably from tip-offs, whether that's from travel agents, maybe in some of the social network groups, the private groups on Facebook, for example. We get all sorts of juicy stuff there with agents just ranting about something that's gone on, and we can investigate it and see what's happening. And we have really close contacts with all sorts of people in the industry, lawyers, accountants, the agency consortia, all sorts of bosses, and it's about keeping in touch with them, really, and trying to get the off-diary stories, as well as the very positive press releases that we get overwhelmed with on a daily basis. It's trying to find those stories that aren't necessarily always the positive ones, which you have to go hunting for under normal circumstances. In terms of the kind of news we cover, it's so vast, and you'll see it from flicking through TTG. We're obviously very, very much focused on anything to do with government policy and regulation, the business of selling travel, the model, how travel agents and suppliers work together is really key, and the wranglings that they might have as well. We do city and finance. We do a lot of movers and shakers and people news, if they're well known in the industry. There's a real sense of community, I think, with the TTG audience, and if somebody's well known, then we're likely to cover whatever they're doing. We love having strongly worded opinions from contributors. There's only really space for one or maybe two in the print magazine each week, but online there's huge scope for newsy, controversial opinion pieces. What I'd always say is please don't just write it on spec and send it to us, particularly if you've sent it anywhere else. It's much, much better to have a chat with us. Say you've got somebody that you think would write a brilliant 300-word piece about X, Y, or Z, and then we can just point out a few things to make sure the angle is right and it's going to be exclusive to us, and we love that kind of thing. But yeah, if it's already written and included in an email and sent to us, unless it's been prior agreed, there's a lot of that we'll turn down, particularly if it comes from a company we've never heard of, somebody we don't think our audience would really respect or rate or be interested in hearing from. So again, please don't go to the trouble of getting it written until we've said that we're keen to take it. And just coming back to our mission statement, the smarter, better, fairer travel, I think The fairer travel side for us is huge, something we're really, really passionate about. So that encompasses responsible travel, sustainable travel, but also diversity and inclusion in travel. So accessible travel, LGBT, things like that. We've got all sorts of events that we run and do a hell of a lot of content around diversity and inclusion. And because it's core to our mission and our purpose, if you can tie into that in any way, then we're likely to prick up our ears when you start talking about it, because we're keen to make sure that we keep up with all of those agendas in amongst all the chaos that's going on at the moment. I'm conscious it can be a little bit tricky sometimes to get your story through to the news team if it's not deemed to be big enough news. So, for example, Sandals is a huge company, very, very travel agent friendly. The trade knows Sandals really well. If Sandals said it's going to open a new resort in Jamaica, that would be huge news. If it's a B&B in Norfolk that travel agents don't sell, and they don't really work with travel agents, it's just not going to make it into the news pages. But what I would say is, bear in mind, we also have the features team. And that is the place for that softer product news. So a resort in Greece doing some kind of new wellness week, maybe a new small hotel opening somewhere in the Caribbean, maybe a new walking route in Spain or something like that. That's not going to get the news team's attention. But if there's a relevant feature coming up, then it's well worth making sure that you know when the feature's running, and get that to the features editor, Abra, in plenty of time, because she can often use those much softer newsy stories, which we get overwhelmed with on a daily basis, and unfortunately a lot of them just won't float the news team's boat. A couple of quick things that we're likely to ignore that I jotted down. We don't cover incentives and competitions. We get a lot of them sent into us, but we actually charge clients to promote competitions and incentives, and there are so many going on at any one time. This tour operator giving away vouchers, this destination giving away, I don't know, a holiday to a travel agent. Unless you're paying us to promote it, we're not going to just promote your incentive and campaign free of charge, typically, unless it's some incredibly amazing one. We don't have the time to be writing stories about every incentive that's being run. So you will find that a lot of those get ignored. We're also not an events promotion bureau. If you've got a client that's holding an event, whether that's for consumers or maybe for travel agents, we can't cover all of those things. We've got our own events. It's a very busy calendar of things that we're trying to promote. So if you want us to come on board and help drive interest in something that you're running, then it's probably better to talk to us about properly marketing it to our audience. We don't cover other publishers and other organisations' awards. We get a hell of a lot of press releases about that, saying this hotel's won this award and this airline's won this award. We just don't cover them. We've got the TTG Travel Awards, which is becoming the Travel Industry Awards. We've rebranded it and changed it up, but we won't write about Skytrax and the World Travel Awards and all those other things. So don't bother sending us those press releases. We're just as picky about consumer surveys as Ben, maybe slightly less so, in that we normally look for 1,000 minimum to consider it a suitable sample size. But again, if it's a survey that's been done by some double glazing firm or something, that's just not a brand name that we would feel comfortable putting in TTG and saying that that's relevant and important survey results. So we ignore a hell of a lot of survey related emails. Just to talk about exclusivity as well, we are extremely competitive with our friends at Travel Weekly. They're a weekly magazine, we're a weekly magazine. We've both got busy websites. We each need different stories each week in our print magazines in order to make sure people keep picking both up. So we're desperate to have stories that we can run first in print, even if it then goes out wider the next day online or whatever, that's fine. And they're exactly the same. They'll always try and get something that's exclusive for them in print so that we've got different content. So if possible, especially if you've got something really exciting to talk about, just sound us out. If you were to give this to us exclusively, could we do more with it? And often the answer is yes, if it's a really great story, which can work better for your clients. Yeah, they were my main tips. I think just tying in with something Ben mentioned about not being too scared to let us speak to people. I think we are probably a bit more trusted than your typical consumer journalist, and we've obviously got a great network ourselves. Can be a bit frustrating for us when a PR will insist that we go through them for everything, even though we know the person and, you know, we've met them at conferences and we've seen them on the circuit for years, trying to insist that everything has to go through you and we're not allowed to just give a phone call to that individual to try and get a quote on press day, can be quite frustrating, and it can mean you miss out on opportunities as well, because we know you're not happy for us to just call whichever MD. We have to talk to you, and we just think, oh, it's not worth it. We've not got time. We just need to call that person's mobile number. So please let us build direct relationships and be happy about that and trust us with that, and you'll end up getting more coverage for your client, I'm sure, rather than being kind of super protective over it. Yeah, they were the main points I wanted to make. And oh, again, copying Ben here, it's so frustrating when a PR pitches an interview opportunity to us and we say, okay, yeah, we'll have a chat with them, and then comes back and says, can you send us a list of questions and topics? No, we don't have time for that. If you're happy for us to interview them, particularly if you've suggested it, then please don't then ask us to send you a list of questions. We don't really have time, and it's not how journalists like to work. That's quite a negative point to finish on, but yeah, something our news team really feels passionately about. Yeah, I'll leave it there, Henry, if that's okay.
No, absolutely perfect. I totally accept that last point. I guess sometimes if you want the executive to go away and think up what they, think up responses on areas that they're actually not that clued up on, sometimes it can help for them to be tipped off on where you're going to be questioning. But it shouldn't be put as a precondition to the interview in the first place. Yeah,
and sometimes it's when they've pitched the interview to you to talk about a certain thing, and you say, yeah, that sounds great, and then they come back and say, oh, can you send us some questions? And you think, you've told us what the angle is, and we've agreed the angle. I'm not going to spend an extra half hour now coming up with all the questions for what we're going to ask on the day. Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, we've got so many questions. We're going to rattle through these. We've got 20 minutes here.
Can I just interrupt 1 second?
Yeah, Ben, go right ahead.
The point on must going through the PRs is, I'm so glad Pippa said that, because so often what you as the PR don't know is that actually when we speak to the person, they'll say, oh, do save my mobile number, do get back in touch. And it's not saying that when the contract's up for renewal, they're going to say, well, oh, sorry, PR agency, you haven't done anything, because actually in making the original connection, you can still claim that you've done that. It's not, but, and also they tend to be so clued up, the managing, that they don't need to be nannied. They've got a point of view. They know how to deal with the media. They're not, because the people that we're trying to call are often the chiefs of big companies, not the tiny little operators. And they've done yonks of media training and results presentations to the city and stuff. They know how to answer a few questions on the new quarantine, for example.
Very good indeed. Very good. All right. So let's get cracking. I've got a couple of quick ones from Liz Blakeborough of Blakeborough PR. For both of you, best time of day or week, perhaps time of day, think about, the digital edition of TTG and the next day of the Times. Best time of the day to contact you. And in TTG's case, best time to contact Jennifer Morris, the news editor. Quick answer on that from either of you?
It depends. If it's huge news, then contact us anytime. Obviously, we're online as well, and we certainly don't want to miss a news story because it's press day. But if it's something that's not going to be kind of, page 4 to 5, which is sort of our page 1, if it's not going to be a story there, then it's probably better to talk to us on maybe a Monday. We go to press on a Thursday and sort of a Friday as well now, because we're digital only. So Monday's a good day, Monday, Tuesday, but don't be calling on a Thursday for something that's a bit softer, for sure.
Cool. Hope your print issue comes back really soon. Ben, what about you on that one?
Again, if it's big, ring, mobile, whatever, fine. Please don't follow up press releases by ringing my mobile phone. It's so irritating. Best time of day is very first thing. News conference at the Times is 10:30. The first news conference for the Sunday Times is on a Tuesday. I'll pick which paper. Now that we work across both, it's a bit of a complex issue, and it's easier for you just to pitch the idea. Don't suggest which title. It doesn't hugely help. So very first thing in the morning or evening time, which I know is not particularly sociable, but the hours are a bit erratic. And I mean, after 5:36, unless there's a major story going on, I'll have filed for the next day's paper and we'll be thinking about if there's stuff to be doing the next day. So evening's good as well. But again, also if there's a huge travel story going on that I'm likely to be working on, then I'm likely to be finished late in the evening. So it's more likely to get missed. But yeah, early mornings and early evenings basically are the best time. But obviously, as Pippa says, if it's big, anytime, night, day.
Liz also raised a good question. As travel stories evolve across the media, and we all know what the story is at any moment in time, is it worth PRs just sending in a 1-paragraph quote from their spokesperson on the story as it stands?
Interesting. I think, and I'll be interested to see what Pippa makes of this, because I wrote while Pippa was speaking, commenting on huge issues. Yes, if the person is big enough to if it's a massive story and it's a single B&B owner commenting on quarantine, there's no hope in hell that it's, and bearing in mind with lots of some of the current stories, I've been doing them with journalists in the lobby, I'm not gonna say, oh yeah, well, we've actually got an interview with Grant Shapps, but we'll do a bit of reaction from the industry and just pop in this cottage owner's quote. But if you are TUI, yes, absolutely, send in. And I don't want to copy Pippa in using TUI. There are other big travel companies I know, of course, but you want to be commenting on something that's realistic to what about you. It needs to make sense. There's no point on a cottage company commenting on quarantine, because it doesn't really, and sometimes you just think, well, there's no way we would put that in from that person. It's not a judgment of their character, it's just that there's only a limited 21 pages of news in the Times every day.
Pippa, what are your thoughts?
Sometimes we will use the occasional comment that's sent in like that. I think probably more typically, if the company and the individual sounds interesting and their point of view sounds interesting, we might be more likely to go back to them and say, could you develop this actually and turn it into a 250, 300 word opinion piece for us, and it can stand alone rather than being 2 sentences in a separate news story. So worth sending, but we do get a lot of them, so don't expect pick up all the time.
The other thing I would add as well is that if you're sending them out to loads of people, that is when I come back and say, can I speak to this person on the phone? Because we can't have, A, they always sound robotic, as I said, but B, we can't have exactly the same words as the Mail, the Telegraph, the Guardian, everyone. And when they're big companies, they do get picked up by everyone.
Yeah.
Very, very good.
I think if you are sending something and it hasn't gone elsewhere, just try and just make it really, really clear, because we scan things so quickly and sometimes we just presume something's on spec and that it's gone elsewhere, and actually that might not be the case. So just use the words exclusive and this is just for you, please let me know, whatever, so that we can't possibly miss that, because it is easy to just presume. I just spend all day deleting, and if you have gone to the trouble of getting something that is a bit more bespoke for us, then just make sure we don't overlook it.
I couldn't agree more with Pippa on that, actually. Yeah, if it's something that you are sending to me, tell me, make it really damn obvious that it's only turned to me, because basically my email is just a graveyard of unopened press releases. Yeah, sorry.
Great. So Rose Teague, PR for the Cayman Islands, which is where I would rather be right now, she asks, is it best to pitch news to the people you know, or is it best just to go in via a kind of news desk email address? Ben?
Don't pitch to our news desk. It's utterly bonkers waste of your time. There is an email address, I think it's home.news@thetimes.co.uk, and I've never seen it. I've never had any interaction with it. Pitch directly to me. My email address, please don't send, I ask and everyone ignores me, but please don't send press releases to it. But ben.clatworthy@thetimes.co.uk is my direct email. Send stuff direct to me. I'll put it to the news desk, because they won't. I panic ringing our news desk. I don't like the experience of calling the news desk particularly, and I'm sorry, they tend to be pretty brutal.
Yeah. So pitch to you ideas, news hooks, thoughts, and pitch something short and sharp that's going to grab your attention, and you'll get back to them, or you're just not interested, in which case you'll delete the email, but don't send press releases. Yeah. Pippa, any thoughts on that one?
Our news team, they like to all be approached at the same time, sometimes just because they're often in normal circumstances out of the office doing different things, maybe on a proofing morning or whatever. So it's a really good idea to make sure you're sending it to the full news team. So Jen, James and Tom. Sophie and I, as kind of senior editorial team, we like to keep copied in on things, but I'm still years after leaving the features team, getting people sending things just to me in the first instance, and I write very little now, so it's really good for it to get into the hands of Jen, James and Tom in the first instance, and one of them is bound to get back to you if they're going to run with it, and whereas Sophie and I, we will only have to forward it to them, so slowing things down, even though you might know us better, and it's more likely to be missed because I frankly can't keep up.
Okay.
I would just say that the opposite's true. It's don't pick up a correspondence and send pictures to multiple correspondents, because we're not a team in the same way. I talk to our transport correspondent on the phone, but not all the time, and it just gets incredibly complicated if two people are doing the same story or two people are pitching the same thing to the news desk. It just gets unbelievably out of control.
Okay. Let's spend a few minutes looking at the evolving story about the world beginning to open up, from the UK opening up to Europe opening up, and corridors, long haul opening up, because I've got so many questions on that. Paul Charles of the PC agency, who is heading up the PR side of the campaign to ease the quarantining rules. His question is, do you think the story on the trade's fight back against the quarantine rules is the longest running kind of front page story the trade media has seen? There's a PR man for you. Is it a chart record? Is it a world record?
So is it the longest running campaign that TTG
been on the front pages, or the top of the website?
Possibly. Probably the one people have been most animated about. I have to give that some thought, campaign-wise. All right, fine. Paul, yes.
Paul, yes, it's a winner. You will be in the Guinness Book of Records. I mean, everything hands on that and the Foreign Office advice, doesn't it? So, the trade has, in PR terms, has done a great job there to pull together, a whole body of people in a PR to kind of get their message through and fight back. Otherwise, 2020 is not going to happen. So you mentioned Sandals, Natalie Eels at Sandals. How can long-haul travel companies get cut through in the media at the moment? But Ben, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm so sorry. I was thinking about Paul Charles's campaign and not boosting his ego by telling him that it's...
Natalie at Sandals, in fact, I'm going to add another one as well. Natalie at Sandals is saying, how can long-haul travel companies get editorial cut through, and not just in fantasy travel pieces where I'd rather be? Beth Hine at KBC, who's got a lot of US clients, she's saying the Florida Keys are now reopened for American travelers. The Brits can't go there now, but they can book. How does Florida Keys start getting its message out into the media? Should we start with you, Ben?
I think that one of the most interesting things that I read in the TTG analysis that then ended up making the front page was about airlines needing to get people back on planes. I personally wouldn't feel comfortable flying to America at the moment for various reasons, and I appreciate it's really difficult for long haul people with lots of long haul clients. I totally get that. It is just very difficult because really we're all looking to Europe at the moment. We're all saying, I'm interested to see what the story over the next few, once the FCO lifts its advice, we're bound to see reciprocal deals. Although, as I was saying just before we came on, I don't know quite why the British government think that everyone's going to be so welcoming of us when we've got the second highest death rate in the world. But if we get the travel corridors, FCO lift the advice, the most interesting story is going to be to see what the consumer does. And I think staycations will be massive. can't see people running to long haul things this summer personally, and I think that's going to be it. We'll see what happens in Europe, and then we'll start seeing what happens long haul. But I don't see, I mean, there's that's an example of where we will have, and I know you reference it in the question saying outside of the wish you were here features, but that is probably where to, if you're a long haul person, put your attention at the moment, because I couldn't write a story. I mean, if someone can bring me some data that says people are booking loads of flights to America, I'll be extremely interested to see it and be able to stand it up.
Yeah. Pippa, what's the trade view on long haul summer 2020?
I think summer, yeah, we're not really writing about long haul for summer 2020, but we are doing a lot about future travel, and we're always really interested in what's selling well. And actually, tour operators, long haul tour operators tell us that winter sun and 2021 is selling really well, and we like those bits of positivity really. We're doing a travel agent tracker each week at the moment. We're asking several hundred of our audience what they've had inquiries for and what they've sold, and yeah, Caribbean and America are actually selling really well, but for next year, well, I say really well, but you know, they're smallish numbers, but there's definitely an interest there. But we're trying to, if we get some press releases about, you know, products that are for departure in July 2020, August 2020, we're probably going to be a bit sensitive about that, because we wouldn't hate to be advising travel agents to sell a product that gets taken off sale the day after, because that tour operator has decided to can their program up until that point. So we're being a little bit careful about, yeah, July, August, I'd say.
Very good. Well, okay, let's look at domestic quickly. We've got Nadia Wolford of Intrepid says, with the imminent launch of domestic travel, what's going to stand out for you? And the Times readers. And Debbie Walker from Drifters Waterways is saying, we're seeing a spike in interest, but people are reluctant to book until they hear from the government that domestic travel can resume. Are you beginning to take a punt on domestic travel in the Times and actually name destinations and prices, Ben, or is it all theoretical?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've been publishing a lot of UK stuff in the actual travel section, which is where I do sit and work. I am on a features desk, and I don't want to diminish from that. And I do write for the features section as well. So do come to me with those sorts of ideas as well. I don't blanket ignore them by any stretch of the imagination. And in normal times, I have a page called Taking Off in the travel section, which is brilliant for the more light-hearted stuff that wouldn't make the normal main news pages, but fits perfectly in travel. And actually, that's where surveys, you know, logically proper thought out ones, not double glazing companies, as Pippa says, will feature. And so I don't want to totally say never do a survey. Canal holidays, very interesting actually. It's a bit difficult with everyone saying that searches are up for everything. It is difficult, but we did it with camping. It would be, yeah, I mean, get in touch, Debbie. I think we should have a chat. And imminent launch of domestic travel is going to be interesting because it's going to be a massive story, and that's where it'll get its local backlashes. It's going to be a much bigger story than necessarily stuff coming from travel PRs. I think it'll be it's one of those ones that will probably end up slipping out of my hands and end up being regional correspondents and stuff as well who will be doing it, because it's just going to be the story. I mean, the number 10 press conference, if you bore yourself to watch it anymore, it's so many questions from the political journalists about holidays at the moment. It's just on everyone, when can we stay overnight? It's almost bigger than a travel just a travel desk story in a way, the domestic tourism. Yeah,
I mean, I've kind of got this same question from Kate Popham at Oyo and Fran Lambert at Normandy Tourism. It's kind of when are you going to look at destinations that involve a ferry trip at least? It's going to be on a relaxation of you know, Foreign Office advice and so forth. Is that right, Ben?
Yes, I mean, when things open up is when it'll be, yeah, I mean, we need to see. There's no point really hugely speculating on stuff that we don't know about yet. And if anyone has a fantastic in with the FCO, then let me know, because getting information out of them is very tricky. But yeah.
I think from TTG's point of view, we've sort of scrapped our features list for now. It's more of a features conversation, I guess, rather than a news conversation, but it just didn't seem right to be running our normal 1 or 2 product or destination features a week when a lot of those places were off sale and maybe agents weren't really getting any sales inquiries anyway. So we're still doing those features now, but not off the schedule at all. We're doing maybe 1 destination a week and just saying, okay, what the hell's going on in Spain this week? When is it going to open? What are the tour operators saying? So there's still scope to get involved in those, but it's it's certainly not the normal schedule at the moment.
Very good. Well, we've had some great questions and some wonderful insights from our 2 guests. Just to finish, I had a couple of questions from Siren Communications. I'm going to leave us all with this thought from their founder, Rachel O'Connor, who says, will space travel this year become easier to book than long haul travel? Thank you for that one, Rachel. Pippa and Ben, you've been marvellous. Thank you for joining us. We'll do a longer one day, but from TravMedia's team, we're very, very grateful for you taking part.
Oh, pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Great to have you here.
Thank you very much, and I hope it was a tiny bit of interest to people and will make everyone's lives a little bit easier to understand.
I think it was very, very helpful indeed, Ben. Thank you very much indeed. All right, well, goodbye to everyone out there. See you the next time. Thanks for joining us today.
Bye.